It's now about 8 minutes to 7. The Free Market Adam Smith Institute has come up with what it says is a solution to London's housing crisis. Build 1 million homes on the Green Belt. Tom Papworth has written the Institute's report. We'll hear from him. He's with us in the studio, and we're joined on the line by Helen Marshall of the Campaign to Protect Rural England. Tom Papworth, first of all, why is this, in your view, the way out of the problem?
Well, I mean, the first thing is that politicians, the public, policy experts all recognise that we have a housing crisis in this country. We have been trying now for many years to cram the housing in the existing urban areas. For 40 years, we've been building far too few homes, despite the fact that for 20 years we've had brownfield first policies, and for 70 years we've had policies of urban containment like the Green Belt, which are based on very outdated and very ambiguous notions, and which don't really stack up even in their own terms.
Well, why does the notion of the Green Belt not stack up in your view?
Well, you need to separate why the government says we need the Green Belt from why the public thinks we need it. I mean, the government uses very vague terms about the distinction between urban and rural land, despite the fact that the government itself can't decide what constitutes urban and what constitutes rural. It's based on ideas of urban sprawl that are, again, very ill-defined.
Well, say they're ill-defined. If you went into the street and said to people, do you want cities just to be able to expand endlessly into the countryside, they would say no.
And if you said to people, do you want houses to be affordable, they would say yes. So there is a challenge here. But we're not talking about sort of this endless concreting over Britain. We're actually talking about building on a tiny fraction of land.
What percentage?
You could meet Britain's housing supply on 0.5%, housing supply for the next decade, on 0.5% of the land, 3.7% of the Green Belt.
Well, it depends where 0.5% is. I mean, you're obviously not going to build it on the top of the Pennines. I mean...
Well, that's exactly the point. It's quite clear that where we need to build it is near our thriving urban centres. I mean, London is obvious, as you said, but it's also Oxford, Manchester, Birmingham, Cambridge. Many of these cities are desperate to expand, and they cannot do so because they're being throttled by the Green Belt.
Right. Helen Marshall, a throttling Green Belt.
I think that's a fundamental misinterpretation of the Green Belt and its purpose. I mean, as you've mentioned, the public are very supportive of the Green Belt, and they recognise the very important role it has played in the planning system. In fact, you could say it's the most effective part of the planning system and the most loved.
Why? Because
it does actually fulfil a number of purposes, including stopping cities expanding all over the green fields. It protects the surrounding villages, and for example, in Oxford's case, it also provides very important protection for the setting of the historic city.
Let me ask you both, what would the difference be? You both mentioned Oxford. What would the difference be if there had never been a green belt round Oxford? What would it now be like, Tom Papworth?
It would certainly be bigger. I mean, I'm glad you mentioned Oxford, because Oxford's one of the cities where the greatest level of housing pressure is. At the moment, the average home in Oxford is more than 10 times the cost of the average income of someone who lives in Oxford. So vast numbers of people in Oxford, people who were born in Oxford or people who want to go to Oxford to take jobs, simply cannot afford to live there.
Just to go back to the point, how different a place would it be without the Green Belt?
I don't think it would be substantially different. I mean, what you would have is generally areas of not very environmentally valuable farmland would have been built on with nice spacious housing where people want to live. But all the areas of genuinely environmental value, all the ancient woodlands, all the areas that are naturally beautiful would still have been protected.
Right. Helen Marshall.
I think Oxford would look very different and would be almost unrecognisable if it had been allowed to expand in the way that's being suggested. One of the benefits of the Green Belt is to focus the mind on regeneration within cities. And if you take Oxford as an example, it's all very well to expand ever outwards, but the centre of the city, as a medieval city with small street patterns, cannot expand. So you would have enormous problems over and above those that you see already in terms of accessing the city centre. And I have to say it's also a pretty lazy assumption that agricultural land is of no value when we are in a position of only being able to provide about 60% of our own food anyway.
Let me, Tom Papworth, just let me come back to this. Do you have quite apart from the desire to solve the housing crisis, which everybody has, one way or another, with different solutions to it, do you have an ideological objection to the Green Belt?
It's not really an ideological objection. I mean, what the objection I have is that it's pricing many young people, many poor people out of affording homes. And it doesn't stack up even in its own terms, as I said before. I mean, the idea that the Green Belt is frankly green, the idea that it is environmentally all valuable, is simply wrong. And I have to disagree with Helen about the farmland here. If you look at independent surveys, or if you ask organisations such as the RSPB what they think of farmland, they recognise that farmland is sterilised of all the wildlife, of all the wildflowers, by herbicides and pesticides so that we can grow single monocrops. That's not green.
Tom Papworth from the Adam Smith Institute, Helen Marshall from the Campaign for the Protection of Rural England. Thank you both.
3 minutes to 7, time for a weather forecast. And